Welcome to my cellar. Some interesting things to talk about tonight. And a couple things that I'm going to be talking more about also in other places later as we get to it. All right, well, let's start out with this. Seeing D&D and Stranger Things has been a treat, as I was the exact same age as the characters in those years, and D&D was a wonderful creative escape from the suburban American South. I started playing again this year after a 33-year break, jumping into online 5e. Nostalgically watching some videos about old school D&D, including yours, helped inspire me to jump back into the game, so thank you. Shortly after restarting, I was adopted by a group of fun and supportive young'uns, his words, that I've now played many games with. At 51, I've got 20 years or more in all of them. 5e feels a little overpowered compared to what I grew up with. Good observation. But I'm making peace with that. I appreciate a little role-playing advice from you, though. I'll see what I can do. What are some good ways for a player to help create, through roleplay, the deadly hair standing up on the back of your neck feeling of the older, more dangerous game I grew up with? DMs, of course, do the heavy lifting here, but I'd like to find ways as a player to sprinkle in some old-school flavor to my 5e games. Okay, we'll start with that one. There's two questions. We'll deal with this one first. To be honest, I don't know what a player can add without running a very severe risk of being a dork or an annoyance. You can't sit and do sound effects. DM is going to like that, and the rest of the players at the table are probably going to think you're a little odd. It's mostly in the hands of the DM to create the atmosphere and the feel and the vibe. However, you can, now that I think about it a little, you can do something. You can role play. Listen, hear me through. Gary was very strict on not letting us do anything our character was not likely to be able to do or know or, whatever. So, that in mind, don't go out of character at all. Start, reacting to stuff and get the other people at the table jittery. Because if you can get them jittery, well, hey, goal number one is accomplished, because you're getting some of that old hair raising on the back of your neck feeling. Score one for you. Other than that, you could act like you're paranoid. Whoa, what was that? Did you hear that? Then they're liable to just think you're nuts and throw lemons at you. It's real hard for the player to do it. The newer players aren't into that theater of the mind stuff that we were there. When we were playing theater of the mind, and I don't necessarily mean this as a knock. I mean it as something that I have observed. When we were playing theater of the mind, we were playing, our references were movies made in the 50s and the 60s, whether they were bad sword and sandals movies from Italy. God knows I saw every one of those I possibly could. Or the Sir Walter Scott movies from England, from Pinewood Studios. Our theater of the mind had a different set of still images to draw from. For a generation that grew up on Scooby-Doo, who grew up with much more animation than we did. I can remember when the Hanna-Barbera stuff was prime time. First thing after the news was Huckleberry Hound, or Yogi Bear, or Snagglepuss, and all that kind of stuff. That was a big deal. And the Jetsons were prime time. The Flintstones were a big hit. And that was a novel thing. The next generation got to grow up with Speed Racer and some of that weird stuff, but also saw some of the Bakshi stuff beginning. There were underground comics floating around with wildly different art styles and darker and more fantastic visions. And so they have a different set of still shots when they play in their mind. Try to recognize and allow for that, and I think it'll help you guys try to meet somewhere in the middle. Any general game playing and or role playing suggestions for the old guy at the table to mesh well with a table that's much younger? We get on well as is, but I'm always happy to help and find ways to improve the experience. Well, you could try playing like an old schooler. Check for traps. Check for secret doors. Inspect the walls. Be cautious as you're walking ahead. Look for tripwires. Do all the things we had to do to merely survive, and now they seem to just kind of gloss over all of that. And let's get to the fun. Well, there's that old school vibe again. You can get some of that vibe going at the table when you're the one insisting that you're looking for the traps, you're looking for the... And after a while, even if he hadn't thought about it before, your DM's liable to throw you a bone anyway. And if it's some trap that could have been especially harmful or even lethal to the group, well then you've created a new dynamic, because now you're going to be looking over your shoulders looking for stuff that might kill you. And there should be some of that stuff there, in my opinion. Yeah, I say go full-fledged old school. Ask questions. Take notes. Do things they probably... I'm only assuming here, based on what I've heard and anecdotal and whatever. Do the kind of stuff that we used to do. Make maps. Take taking notes. Make marks on walls. Whether it's your secret sign or... pardon me. How rude. But hey, I'm a curmudgeon. Marks on the walls to know you've been this way before. Try that. Okay. I'm going to tread very lightly here. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I have defended many bodies, especially in the past several months. So I'm not exactly sure how to answer this next question, but I'd like to address it at least vaguely. What if an orc identified as a giant? What special abilities would they get? None. None. There's been a lot of hate and vitriol about trans community and being embraced and part of our community. And if what you are referring to here is using the buzz-loaded phrase identified as, if a woman wants to transition to a man in today's society, does not make her as strong as a man. I use this example of a woman because we'll go with an orc, in comparison, a smaller specimen, identifying as a giant. Just because the orc thought they were a giant and told everybody to call him a giant doesn't make him a giant. Now, if you're just trying to bait me, I refuse to rise to the bait. I can identify myself as Norwegian Viking. I'm not. I have Swede, but no Norwegian. Because I choose to identify as a Norwegian Viking does not make me good with an axe, or able to row all day, or not blow my guts over the side every time we had a storm at sea. Again, we're treading around in a minefield here. Most people know that I'm very inclusive. I've called out people that were hateful, and this isn't real life. Identifying doesn't make it so. I personally have a great deal of unease about an individual born male who then identifies as female being able to compete in female sports. Track and swimming come to mind because of long strand muscles and those however many years of testosterone that fueled the growth before, whether it was chemical or just simply psychological, they still produced muscle fibers that females and estrogen didn't produce. Doesn't change anything. Personally, I don't think individuals born male, subject to the ravages of testosterone for however many years, 10, 12, 15, 20, however long before the person begins to identify, I don't think that's a fair advantage. If an orc identified as a giant, got into a scrape and say, hey, don't you know who I am? I'm a giant. They just probably get hacked down right there on the spot. With a hearty, right, as they swing down on you. As to special abilities, none. None. Come on. If you're trying to goad me, didn't work. In my opinion, an unfair monster is any monster that the DM knows the party has no reasonable way to prepare for or defeat and pits against them anyway, knowing that. Players should be cautious and make reasonable efforts to prepare, but any monster can be unfair if the DM knows it'll screw them. That's sort of the role of the DM, right? To avoid unfair monsters and provide ways to overcome them. Whether or not the players find that or make the smart moves is up to them. But there should always be a way. Your mileage may vary, of course. A DM is a referee. Very, 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 very important here. Not an opponent versus the players. That requires keeping an ego in check, and too many DMs can't do that. Yeah, boy, there's a problem we can talk about. Egos, DMs and their ego. I'll make an observation. This is not a blanket condemnation, and it's only based on a very few anecdotal incidents. But some of these professional 5e DMs are suffering from way too much of letting their egos get way, way, way out of hand. I've known D&D DMs who have not liked to sit at the table, who like to walk around and all that, and that's fine. I know DMs who are much more sedentary, and that's fine. It's however you're comfortable. But I have seen of the 5e DM games, of the 5e games that I have seen going on, in my opinion, an inordinate number of people are running these games are frustrated community players. They are finding a way to release their inner thespian. It's not their now. If it is possible, if done well by someone with talent, that it could make the game more enjoyable. But it's superfluous to the game for the DM to be walking around and voicing all the characters. That's just a DM's ego run amok. And I agree on the other thing that, anything that you know they're going to be screwed on is not fair because you're not there to oppose them. You're there to facilitate the game. The umpire in American baseball does not go there to pitch the ball or hit the ball. He's there to adjudicate the game, call the balls and strikes, call the outs. He's not there to be a player. He's there to be the ump. The center official in a European football match, what we Yanks call soccer, is not there to be a player. He is there to see that both sides play fairly, play cleanly, and just let it go. Record the goals, record the cards if there are any. I was a youth referee for many, many years. That's what I was there for. Wasn't there to help them play better, tell them when they were playing badly, tell them I wasn't there to congratulate them when they played well. It's not what I was there for. I was there to enforce the rules and laws of football, soccer. Right. Speaking another on the same general vein, speaking of unfair monsters other than shape changers, what monsters would you consider to be unfairly punishing to spring on an unsuspecting players? Something like a dragon is very strong and difficult to fight, but usually they have some forewarning one is around. Yeah, they smell them or they hear them, or they see charred body bits tossed around the mouth of the cave. Yeah, there's usually a forewarning. But some monsters aren't as easy to detect, and 1E famously had just a ton of monsters that disguised themselves as regular parts of the dungeon. Yeah, there were the cubes and I'll think of it in a second. The thing that can look like a box. I have a couple of them around here. I'm blanking at the minute. 73 and 11:45 and too much caffeine. But any monster, I have a rule of thumb. That I use when I'm trying to decide whether something's fair. And there are different ways to go around it. Mine is, what's the average number of hit dice in the party? What's the average number of hit points in the party, or the aggregate? You can use either one. And then, because monsters, that definition of things that aren't player characters, aren't NPCs, that are generally antagonistic toward the players, monsters should be about 20 to 30% more, because they're stupid. But if you are stupid also, they can kill you with brute force and bite you and chew you and eat you. But being clever hominids, we should be able to outsmart them. Now, there are smart monsters. And that's where you have to become Toth, measuring the weight of the feather against your soul, and the groups, whether or not they could reasonably be expected to not all die at the hands of. One that would be, there's so many things. For instance, anything with psionic abilities, like a mind flayer, brain moles, those kind of things, they are bad news. A couple of mind flayers don't even have to be full strength, i.e. the full number of hit dice or whatever. A couple of mind flayers can absolutely screw a party up good. I mean, screw them up so bad they're bleeding from the ears when you get done with them. If you have, I personally would not throw a mind flayer at a group that didn't either have some psionic resistance, a person who had some psionic ability, because I don't get any pleasure out of slaughtering children. It'd be like sending out the 8th grade school soccer team to play against the 5th graders. Hey, they might have a good 5th grade team. There might be some good players on that team. But they're still 5th graders. Their legs aren't as long. Their lungs aren't as big, so they can't run as fast or as long. What's the point? You know who's going to win that. That's kind of what you got to look at as DM. What's the point if it's going to be so lopsided? Now, that's not to say that you can't introduce elements or hints or ties to really powerful things and stuff as part of your campaign, as an ultimate goal, as a showdown, whatever. Certainly you could. You can. But if it feels like that 8th grade team taking on the 5th graders, that would, I personally don't find any fun there. I can find lots. There's an Etten, a two-headed giant who's really rather stupid, is so big and so tough that a lower level party doesn't stand a chance. I learned a valuable lesson along these lines when I was designing an adventure for Iron Wind Miniatures to go with their Kickstarter when they started the old Ralph Parthas Chaos Wars line. I was trying to design an adventure, except instead of having human PCs, they were orcs and goblins. It was a chance to get your evil on. All right, and the adventure took place during the big climactic battle at the end of the Chaos Wars. And the first time I put together, there were three orcs and 3 goblins, and the goblins were all archers, though they didn't have great range. They had very good aim, and they, to just give them a little warm up, getting in, one of their first encounter was a bedraggled small merchant's caravan of camels and donkeys, and they had like 3 0-level guards and a 2nd level sergeant, very minimal. In the first 2 playtests, they nearly wiped out the combined orc-goblin because the orcs and goblins weren't getting good die rolls. The human guards were getting great die rolls. So I had to do a lot of fidgeting and fussing and adjusting there. And the hit points that I gave the guards. I ended up knocking one of the guards. I taken away one of the guards, I think, and you cannot prevent one side having a great bunch of die rolls and the other side having a suck bunch of die rolls. That's going to happen sometimes. But looking at the average of what should happen, based on averages, is the way you want to design for that. I almost thought of that thing that, yeah, and you're all going to go, oh well, I'll think of it. Anyway, it's just, I don't know, I can't understand what fun is had just slaughtering player characters. Mimic. Ta-da. I don't know. Speaking of dealing with pretentious pulpit pounders, I didn't know if I did, but apparently I would. When did TSR decide to add devils into the mix along with the demons? Well, it goes along with the second half of your question. Also, can you explain any of the driving forces behind the synonymous monsters that developed in D&D and AD&D? Was it meant to keep metagamers off kilter or what? Ta-da! Okay. First edition, when we got done with it, we said, that's the way it should do. That's the way we should have done it the first time. First edition was tougher, meant to be tougher, because we felt we had provided a better system of progression to get there, and so therefore that was fair and doable, equitable. It's the monsters. Generally speaking, when the monsters' stats and stuff didn't agree, first edition was harder, tougher, more hit points, more hit dice, greater damage, whatever, because we purposely ramped up first edition. We began to look at original as beginning for kids, or the kid level. God knows we were none of us very young. Pardon me. We came back to that concept with basic, because we took original, we made it to AD&D. It was tough. We decided, okay, we got to tone it down back a little ways, get an introductory model figured out, and take out a lot of the stuff that would be objectionable to parents of children of the age that we were going to be, young adults, that we're going to be aiming this at. So, when original monsters got tougher in first edition, that's why. It was supposed to be tougher. You were supposed to know what you were doing by then, because in our mind, the ideal would have been play it with basic. Oh, I love it. By first edition, and you've already got an idea what's going on when you jump into first edition, and of course it's going to be tougher. And yes, Gary hated rules and learns as much as I did. And if we could, you think it has how many points? You think it hits for how bad? Oh, you don't make the assumptions. There was a lot of that in there. We were actively trying to improve the product. New fenders for this one, and a better paint job. Why did we add in demons? Well, why did we have to have new monsters in Greyhawk, and more new monsters in Blackmoor, and more new monsters? You see where I'm going here? Myself, I could have played for 40 years with just what came out in the very first, original D&D without any of the supplements. Now, there's other things and the supplements that I wouldn't want to play without today. But as far as how many monsters, it's one of the irritating or annoying factors in gaming. Why people have to have a new monster. Oh, I killed an orc. What's next? Oh, I killed one of those already. New things to kill, or new things to outwit, or new things to enslave, or new things to do, rather unpleasant and uncivil things to do. Oh, sorry, this sugar drops every night this time. Some nights I get to it before it happens. So, pardon me. Demons were added, and devils were added. Demons. There was a delineation between the two, and so added in devils because we were feeding this more monsters, different monsters. We were feeding the beast. Mainly, that's what we were doing. We're giving people what they wanted. And trying to do it in such a way that the PTAs and the religious crazies didn't shut us down. For too many months now, my players have overwhelmed 90% of my encounters in any of my games. Also, we are playing 5e. I see no problem with that, but the annoying thing is that the player, all right, typos. Yeah, I can read, but not everybody can spell, and that's okay. I'll figure it out. I see no problem with that, but the annoying thing is that the players annoy me with saying how the game and the world is brutal and everything is so hard. I thought I'd make an adventure that would be so-called brutal, like they were saying, but I'd like to know your thoughts of this and how would I approach it. Well, how many players you got that you can call together? 6, 5, 4, 7, whatever. Come on, use your imagination. You want to be brutal? Okay. The first encounter, somebody takes damage to one of their legs and it doesn't heal right away and their speed is slowed. And later on, they get a sharp shot in the head, or they get knocked down a well or whatever. Any reasonable excuse to have gotten gonged. Be a little muzzy-minded, fuzzy-headed, and start giving them minuses to hit, pluses on the other side, so you're easier to hit, and just whittle them down relentlessly and kill them. Take one of them and just kill them dead outright. Now, it's been said that for somebody to die in 5e, you just about got to run them over with a bus. Okay. You're the DM, get a bus. If they want to whine about how cold and brutal it is, make them play overnight in the adventure. Make them, fort up, camp out, and have them awake all night and jittery. And then in the next morning say, oh, well, it was so little sleep last night. Well, everybody's going to be -2 on the reactions for the remainder of the day. And just keep heaping that stuff on them in a reasonable fashion that is, at this point in time, glossed over and just kind of blended in with the general game mechanics. Have them break weapons, have them lose weapons, have them lose equipment. I don't mean lose it like, oh, where'd I put it? But, it gets busted, it gets trashed. Drop them into pits, and every time they do, make them roll saving throws for all their good stuff, their flasks of oil or whatever. If you want them, if they think it's brutal now, Go back and play absolutely by the book, old school. That was brutal. That's why we didn't get attached to our player characters, because we knew the likelihood of them living long enough to make it worth getting attached to them was pretty small. Guess you can't be pretty nil. All right. Be brutal. Make it like a trek through the desert make it like Lawrence of Arabia going through the desert of stones trying to attack the Turks from the rear. Just hit them with wandering monsters like we used to deal with. My God, if you argued for more than 35 or 40 seconds in Gary's dungeon, he's over there rolling up wandering monsters just to keep you moving, keep you on toe, on point, focused. There's lots of things you can do within the framework of the rules and be much more brutal. Might not be 5e, but that's kind of... again, if you're enjoying 5e, that's great. Lots and lots and lots and lots of people like anime and manga. Other people like film. I'm a film guy. 5e strikes me as more anime and manga. But that's okay. If you're having fun playing it, keep playing. But hey, if you're playing 5e, come on over to the dark side and see if you don't have some fun. I'm not trying to convert you. Just come over and see what we're doing. I know what my predictions might be. Pumping the dew tonight. Good to see I'm well, thank you. Do you ever have the opportunity to create magic items as a character or part of a party? Would love to hear about any experiences you've had. Cheers. Nah, I get to write them and put them in the books. That was a whole hell of a lot more fun. I did have him. I've mentioned this guy before. I did have a guy in my Carbondale original group, and Gary and I kind of handled him with kid gloves because he was blazing a trail on spell research. It was just something that was kind of mentioned, and this is a guy that ended up with 8 or 9 different variations on a fireball, and I found that quite interesting, and I helped him a couple of times. Now wait a minute, do you really mean it's, and it would make him think it through again, and I charged him as much as I could possibly do it without feeling guilty, according to the rules, on what it cost him to do the research in that. But no, we wrote the spells that came out in the books, and that was the hell. To be quite honest, I think that the general spells that are put out, especially in first edition, cover just about anything you need to do. If it doesn't say it's specifically for something, there's so many spells that can be adapted, converted, focused, honed into something else. But, unless you're specifically looking for a spell that's made to cause purple birds to lose direction in flight and collide with each other and fall to earth, just about, anything you could want to reasonably do is doable. Now, if you're going into the later editions, my God. Yeah, the later editions, if you get up high enough, I guess you become like the Swiss Army knife of all magic user player characters. All right. Okay, here's this individual has an aid to keep low-level characters going after being hurt in battle. As you have mentioned, lower-level play could easily end up in death. Yes, it could. Party of 6 could could have to rest after one encounter with 4 orcs because all hit the party for an average of 4 hit points. Party members probably averaged around 5 to 8. First level clerics had 1 to 3 spells. Okay, and he breaks it all down. And then he says, what the likelihoods are. He justifies it. An interesting non-game-breaking tool magic item was created by Wee Warriors in the last DM's kit, Misty Isles, in 77. A gem of healing that healed once for a substantial amount of healing. They had as many as 5 gems that did different things in this module. This concept was modified by a couple of groups in Indiana to a gem that heals every party member for 1d6 a day. Made it a lot easier than having to stop and rest after every 2 to 3 encounters. Not too unbalancing either, and saves the DM from having to leave potion after potion of healing throughout the adventure. Okay. I have a different thing. When I used to run adventures that had the potential to be overnight in terms of gameplay, not real life, I had a rule of thumb that if it so happened that I wanted to let them have a night to rest, because we'll take the Return to the island of Arredondo is a grueling trek against the current up this sluggish, nasty river full of nasty stuff. And so if the dice said that they didn't get interrupted and they got a full 8 hours sleep, they got 1d8 worth of healing overnight. If they got 6 hours uninterrupted, a d6, 4. Okay, you see where we're going here. Now, if all they got was 2 hours uninterrupted, sorry, the rest of the time you're up all night. There's no benefit gained. That's the way I do it in tournament games, particularly because it doesn't mean that you end up nearly dead by the time you get to the end anyway. That's a tournament thing I do, but I can justify that in a campaign because of the way I view hit points: strength, stamina, agility, wiriness, etc. Good night's sleep, much of that is restored. Now, if you've taken more hit points than there are pips on the die, well, that's even more realistic sort of feeling, isn't it? I mean, that's the way I see it. If you want to put an artifact in, that's fine. I always thought that healing and resting up was one of the hardest parts of the game to swallow / justify. Oh, I know that's rude. I'm sorry. You should how late I stay up to do these things. Remember, no, I shouldn't say that. Remember, Gary famously said, if you don't like the rules, change them. As long as your change doesn't make the whole thing skew out of control. And if it does, well, okay, starting next week, it doesn't work that way anymore. There's been the poles on the planet have shifted just a little bit. And magic doesn't work quite the same. Hey, you're the DM. Crafting a siege weapon seems the only way of defeating such mighty foes. What features does your newly crafted weapon have? Does it have magical enchantments? What about a weakness? Well, if you're going to make siege weapons, then I would assume that you are conducting a siege. Or, at the very least, attacking something in a castle or a fortress or a strong point. Unless you had a really really high level wizard or cleric out there to bless it for you or to ensorcel it. No, I mean, come on. A trebuchet doesn't. You don't need enhanced hit points when a trebuchet is throwing a 90-pound boulder at a stone wall. I don't know. Maybe if you want to give it automatic range finding capability, you could give it an enchantment. But what weakness does it have? What's it made out of? Whatever it's made out of is its first weakness. If it's wood, it burns. If it's glass, it breaks. Just saying. Okay. This is a defense of half this, half that, and it's good. It's well thought out. Well, yeah. And while I don't endorse everything in here, it's worth reading. On behalf of PCs and whatnot, I'm a big fan of half-elves since getting introduced to them in first. Seeing them in modern and older literature myths got me to like them more. As a GM, I've generally treated such things as half-elves, half-orcs, dhampirs, etc. I'm not even sure what the hell they are. Along the lines of sort of supernatural heritage of demigods like Hercules and cambions like Merlin, though obviously not on their power level. With later editions, there's been the introduction of trace heritage races like the elementalish genius, genasi, the fiendish tieflings, the angelic Aasimar, the lycanthropic shifters, and so on. I guess that's Dragonborn. Does that come in there too? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Even though if Joe Manganiello hears me say that, he might clobber me next time if I see him. If I don't see him first, because that's what he plays. Anyway, along these lines is how I've dealt with the Dragonborn in my homebrew game, though they are lizard folk with a touch of draconic heritage. Why should humans be only ones to get such windfalls? Sort of the same thing goes with stout halflings who've got traces of hill dwarf heritage in their past. More or less flavor text, it doesn't change any mechanics. Sometimes it helps to put the gold star sticker on the paper to add to a player's enjoyment. Then again, stuff like the original Star Wars movie had a huge impact on me as a kid, and I kind of like throwing in things like the Mos Eisley Cantina scene, but in a more fantasy style rather than sci-fi. So going into a fantasy metropolis and bumping into such folk hits those style elements for me. As always, your mileage may vary. However, especially in my younger days playing the earlier editions, I can definitely say I knew some players who really worked a min-max angle with such character options. In those cases, it wasn't necessarily providing the option being the problem. It wasn't providing the option being the problem, but the player's intent and playstyle with said character during the game. A fair amount of winning the game attitude played into it as well, wrecking a game session or campaign by trying to be king of the hill in a cooperative teamwork play preferences and follies of youth and all of that. Yeah, we learn eventually. Okay, I'm you like playing half this, half that. Okay, I touch on the idea of them being demigods and not the product of loose behavior or the byblows of rapes. I find that much more palatable, and therefore a reason to cut them down even further and have very, very, very few in a campaign. That's just me. What is your ruling on wizard animal familiars, or familiars as a balancing tool for low-powered wizards? Animal familiars don't seem to be a common element in D&D. However, I wonder if they might be an interesting addition for low-level magic users. Well, I'm going to read through this and then I'm going to shoot holes in the argument, as I like to do. Familiars might stave off some of the deadlier threats such low-level hit characters, low hit point characters face, but at a cost to the magic user. In instances where magic users on their last HP has no more spell slots facing bad odds, perhaps they get a last edge roll to see if their loyal familiar will risk self-sacrifice and leap to attack, causing enough surprise for the magic user to escape unscathed. Well, he's already nearly dead, so parting blows, or perhaps the magic user rolls very lucky. The familiar acts as a pseudo spell slot, again at the cost of self-sacrifice, provided that the magic user at least tried to store a particular spell in their familiar prior to it. If that action came at the cost of the wizard, that being no more familiar ever, strictly a one-time chance, even if they fail the roll, they lose their familiar and are tainted forever in the familiar's grapevine. It's kind of where I'm going with it. It's sad, but when the Fluffy transformed into a yowling fireball and destroyed the goblin leader, it really saved the wizard's bacon. But the magic user feels the sacrifice deeply. They'll forever honor the memory of their brave dear. All right, here we go. I like familiars. I never understood why more magic users and druids and even clerics, because I could justify it under the old cleric rules where they're throwing spells, but be that as it may. I don't understand why more familiars aren't used. Now, the problem I do have here is this self-sacrificing crap. I don't remember if last you ever took a bullet for Timmy. Maybe it happened and I just shut it out of my little tender mind. Certainly, if there is such a thing as the familiar grapevine, yeah, you lose a couple of familiars and good luck in having one come up to you again. You're just going to have a taint to your karma, to your aura, that is going to make it exceedingly difficult to have another familiar seek you out. However, there's so many different types of familiars. Horses and monkeys and dogs and cats and birds and lizards and snakes and you could certainly go through quite a series of trying out a familiar. I don't like making the familiar part and parcel of the magic. Storing points, using as a spell slot, don't like that. I do like a familiar that has some eerily uncanny super abilities relative to its species. A cat who never misses when it pounces and can hear even farther or see even farther. A dog that can smell what happened 100 years ago. A lizard that can climb any wall no matter how sheer. I'm not talking, little chameleon. I'm talking like, 30-inch bearded dragon or larger. Just remember they got a right on your shoulder and they got long claws. And bearded dragons know how to use them. I know. I got a couple of friends. Well, I got a granddaughter and a friend. They each have their own bearded dragons, and they're nice enough as far as lizards go. But having them loyally sacrifice, nah. When the chips are down and that link is tenuous and or broken, animals are going to do what all animals do. It's going to run like hell and try to survive. Flee. not fight, flee. I can understand why doppelgangers are problems in later editions. In the original and first, not so much. Party comment, hey look, that guy we just killed was a doppelganger. Using strict rules. Experience points in some early campaigns were based on just killing stuff, so most everything encountered died. No, did you know it took 138 orcs per character to go up one fighter level? Boy, that's making a serious dent in the orc population, isn't it? Gold for XP was either optional or added in Greyhawk supplement. I don't remember either, except I don't like it. I don't award straight one-on-one. I'd much rather award experience bonuses. Everybody gets, 1,100 points for that masterful fight that and duping of the whatever. Some, yes, but I could never ever justify. Oh wow! Especially with the old original rules and charts and tables. Oh wow! I just walked into a room that the chart and table said has so much gold in it. I just went up 4 levels. Nah, not even 1 level. Nah. Lots of points, maybe. And all the things that gold's good for in its own way. All right. A comment. My friends and I love playing Boot Hill. And a couple other people commented after what was it like. And this one responded, it was like playing Cowboys and Indians. The street map had Dodge City, Front Street, and Tombstone, OK Corral, so you have the shootout. Yeah, okay. I guess today we have to call it agricultural workers and indigenous peoples. And I don't mean that to be snarky. Yeah, you're right. It was Saturday morning. See, many younger people grew up with Saturday morning cartoons and gentler stuff. We had Sky King, Lone Ranger, Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy. See where I'm going here? A lot of rootin' tootin' stuff. So we were raised on a diet of odors, cowboy movies, great cowboy shows on TV. And so, yes, it was like playing that. And yes, you could have the shootout at the OK Corral. Or, to go a step farther, you could have a shootout with some of the TV and movie cowboys of the time. Brian Bloom did a couple of small articles about that. And it was not based on real life, but based on either the movie life of or whatever. He gave ratings and assessments, and yeah, there's some nasty people, really good at what they did. That Boot Hill had a high lethality rate, very high. Because you could just be in the saloon when a fight broke out and catch a stray bullet and die. Of course, I've told the stories about Deathless Bob, who on the weekend, the Saturday, we were taking a break from D&D and we were playing Boot Hill, got blown up with a sawed-off shotgun, just walking down the street with his mule going to the army post to get you to draw his rations. So, you can die anywhere, especially in role-playing games. And we have another. Instead of people comparing Gandalf's level to what it would be on Middle-earth, they should stop and think what his level of power would be if he was the wizard of the dying earth, as that's where the foundation of the magic system comes from. So in Vancian terms, he'd be 5th level, if not less. The whole purpose of the article was stating that no matter what you thought, there was no evidence that he was anything more than a fifth level. And we're talking evidence, tangible evidence. This other he goes on. Gandalf was essentially a demigod in Middle Earth, more than human. His limitations come from his specific role as a Grey, just like Saruman's from his role as a White, which Gandalf later claims from him. And the third comment is, doesn't matter if he's a demigod or not, as far as OD&D and fantasy and magic go, the spells he used make him around the fifth level. Yeah, and that's all the article was meant to do, is think. This was put out at a time when last week I talked about more zeros doesn't make the game better. Well, this was a time when people were trying to race up to levels. This was a time that it went from, hey, let's all get together and have a great time, to, oh, Friday, we're all getting together so we can level up faster. It went from fun and games to a race to become the highest level. There's a D&D movie coming out. I've not thought much of any of the movies up to this point. This one I am quite keen on. Great trailer, wonderful people in it. A-list actors instead of some of the who in recent movies. Big budget, because who's putting it together? Hasbro. Now Hasbro is going to do a bang-up job because it's going to sell the hell out of more of their games. So yeah, I'm keen on it. I'm going to be doing a interview, and pardon me again. I'm going to be doing an interview one-on-one with an individual, just about this trailer and the furor that came out about the Druid Owlbear thing. Just infuriates me, and it makes me smack my head and makes me go, oh Jesus, are you kidding me? That kind of thing. And it's indicative of fans of various fantasy things going to see movies. All they want to do is harp on what's not in it instead of enjoying it for what it is. It's got a big name cast. It's got big bucks behind it. It's got a huge huge producer, Hasbro Games. What's not to be keen on? I'm a little psyched. I saw the trailer. Yeah, looks good to me. Oh, it can't be. Yes, it can. There's several spells that account for that. And remember, if this is being produced by Hasbro, the writers are going to be 5e oriented. And there's spells in 5e that make absolutely everything you see feasible within the parameters of 5e. Lighten up. Enjoy it for what it is. Not for what you think it isn't. Not for what you think was left out. I think it's a height of hubris when people go, oh, it's not good because they didn't have this, or they didn't have... If you can't allow the creators of something their own artistic vision, then just shut up until you read it, or see it, or hear it. It's their vision. You can choose to like it or you can choose not to like it. That's your decision. I'm pretty sure that about wraps it up. Oh, one other thing. I'm going to have the first Q&A for the top tier Patreon people. I'm going to do it. Let's see. Today is the 28th. I'm going to do it on Saturday night, the 30th, at 9:30. I better write this down. I'm making other decisions as we go. Saturday night, the 30th, 9:30 Eastern Daylight Time. You will all get a link. It'll last 90 minutes, and it'll be on Zoom. I have access to a commercial Zoom account that I can have 100 people for all day long, if that's what I wanted. God knows it isn't. And on that cheerful note, I'll say, Dodata Govi. Hello, and welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Called it Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.